Hey everybody, all right. So I just wanted to make a follow-up video from the last lecture regarding this animation to discuss on how we can get this into a finished version. So I wanted to discuss bringing in multiple cameras for multiple shots because I overlooked that in the first lecture. Additionally, what I want to discuss is, I'll go through the topics here that I have listed, updating our camera aspect ratio within Unreal Engine because for whatever reason that setting does not come in properly whenever we export out of Maya. I thought it used to. Maybe I'm missing a step there as well. I'm going to talk about a script to help our distant objects make sure that they're always popping into the scene instead of slowly loading in. We will discuss altering the car material colors, post-process volumes, which will allow us to customize this to make this look unique to our creative vision and hide some of these other artifacts that we're seeing. Adjusting the lighting, more render settings, what to do when your render won't work, and additionally sound files. So I want to discuss all that with you today. And we'll start with the multiple camera sequences. I currently do have 2 camera sequences for this shot. So if I pull up my content browser and I go up to content, you can see here that I have shot 1, shot 2, just a default car chase. I will, I'll leave that, and I'll just make a new one. Because that's what we need to do, is we need to have these separated into different shots. Currently, I think I told you all to only have 1 shot in the previous video, but I kind of forgot that we have to have a overall master sequence so that we can have multiple cameras in our scene. Real quick, this is my first shot, by the way. And I want to just talk about it very briefly because you can't really see the other car coming out because there's trees in the way. And if you have this with your project and this assignment or anything else, well, guess what? You can just kind of boogie these fellas elsewhere. I accidentally did move my camera just there, but that's okay because as soon as I scrub, it's just going to go back to the keyframes that I had on that import that I had. And if I don't want to boogie this elsewhere, I could just simply delete it. And all that in the vein of getting my animation easily readable. Just kind of deleting some of the assets around my cars. And maybe I don't want to delete some of these. Maybe I just want to move them so that they'll be in frame to frame my scene up a little bit. Maybe not that tall. I just want to move it down. I won't spend too much more time on this. Just want to talk to you about like, hey, you can't just adjust things in the scene a little bit as long as we're not seeing them floating or intersecting the world. You're kind of hunky-dory. You can also see in this particular shot how rough this is. This car is clearly floating off the ground. I would want to go back and adjust the animation, and I believe as I go to the next shot here with this other car, it flips to the other side of the road. So just make sure that you're working on sequential ideas as well. So to make a overall master sequence, just make a new level sequence, which you can do here in the content browser. We can come up here and say add level sequence, and I'll say car change, and I'll call this final, save, and very easily I just need to go add my shots, individual shots here, click and drag and pull them into the sequence down here at the bottom, and then label them one after another. Just make sure shot 1 and then shot 2. And if I want to see what that looks like from the viewport, what I could do is click this button right here, lock viewport to 2 shots, and when I play, it's going to be playing those sequentially between each other. Okay, cool. The lighting's pretty rough too. We'll talk about how to fix some stuff up, some settings there to help fix this up, but I'm only going to render these first 2 shots for my animation and talk about any potential issues coming from this. Yeah, all right. So moving forward, let's first talk about the proper camera ratios, because you can see here the borders of these 2 shots, it changes currently. It's because I'm going from one aspect ratio to another. And this is pretty straightforward. Here's a list of all of essentially what we need for different aspect ratios. So square would be great for social media, standard 4:3, that's kind of old school. Old television 16:9 is largely what we're used to dealing with, 1920 by 1080, and then also 2.39:1 is pretty standard for cinema nowadays. And then we have the opposite of standard. There's the flip side of it, right? For vertical, and then we have portrait as well. So where do we plug those numbers in at? First off, I need to select my camera, so I need to go into shot 1. In this new master sequence that I have, I'd have to double click it to go inside. Now that I am inside of here, I can select my camera component, and I can adjust these settings over here. Let's see if I can zoom in. There we go. So you come over here to your film back. You could put this to 16:9 for film, but what I have found is that's not quite super accurate for whatever reason. So I just go here and I say custom, and I can then update these based on these numbers here. So if we look by 16:9 for 1920 by 1080, we're doing 36 millimeter by 20.5 millimeter. So that was 36 millimeter. And for you all taking my class, it is not 3.6 but 36. And then it was 20.5. So there we go. And now if I scrub through here, it added okay, 36 and 20.5. 20.5. 36. What is happening here? There we go. So if you have an oddity when you get to type that stuff in, what I ended up having to do when I typed custom here is notice it converted it to centimeters, and you got to move your decimal a couple places over, one spot to the left rather, and then you're good. For whatever reason, whenever I was typing it in, it didn't want to go to millimeters, so just make sure you're ending it 36 based millimeter, and then for whatever reason it's just converting it back to centimeter, and that's fine. Now our aspect ratio is 16:9 for this shot, and I can scrub through that and see. If I want to go back to my main sequence down here at the bottom, I just click this back button, and we have these two windows here, or two shots back to back again. Awesome. And that's very simply just, the aspect ratios there, nothing too crazy. The next thing is a little bit more complex, and I don't even know if I can, I can showcase this because I had multiple renders. Because I was going through, and this is what I was getting, and you can see it here. I'll zoom in so you can see as I scrub the timeline. You can see it there in the very back. Right? You can see those bleachers of that park kind of popping into existence and out of existence. So in video games, that's great to have. That way we're not taxing the system of the player, but you're only loading objects when they're so close to the character or the player, wherever they may be. But for us rendering, we want long distances. We want to see things off in the distance. So for this shot, that's pretty dang rough. And what I want to do to fix that is a lot of things. There is a couple of easy ways, but for this particular project that you all have been given and that we're using for this class, it's kind of difficult to make sure to enable that. You could very easily just type in foliage. I'm in Python. I need to change this from Python to CMD foliage dot force LOD0. We could type that in, but that doesn't really fix our issues. And I'll pull up, I wrote a script essentially that works for this. And I'll share this script in the video description, but then also I'm going to post it to my class so that you can easily download and apply this to your scenes. But essentially, to sum this up, all it's doing is getting all the actors in the level. So it's saying, hey, all actors in this level, and then it's looping them through the actors, finding a hidden node, however instance static mesh component node, and it's increasing this instance in Cull distance to 0. And just to show you, I'll just select one. There's one under the park squarely, which one was under. So rather than making you all do that, I wrote this script that just automatically does it. You just copy this, Control C, and you'll paste it down here. You'll change command prompt to Python. And if you do not have Python, you'll have to enable it. You'll have to go to Window, Edit, Plugins, and you'll search Python. And you'll have to enable the Python editor script plugin. You have to turn that on. And that way you can then start running Python scripts, and essentially you very simply paste that script in down here at the bottom and hit enter. I'm not going to do that because I've already done it, and it takes a little bit of time. Give it 10 minutes. I gave my computer here in my office 10 minutes, but I think For you all, it may take a little bit less or a little bit longer depending on which computer's in the labs or your home system, depending on how beefy that is. Okay, moving on. That is the script. That's what that is in a nutshell. For whatever reason, these overall default codes that we can force upon everything else doesn't work for that. What is it called? Hierarchical instance static mesh. It just doesn't work for that for some reason. And unfortunately, I can't select multiples because that option disappears over here under the details panel. I spent a good amount of time writing that script, so use it. Okay, so distance culling, we talked about that. Let's now talk about the fun stuff, altering the car's material. Really easy, actually. I'm going to select the SUV, and in my details, I selected it through the outliner, but you can, undock your camera from your shot and go to your SUV and select it there. And in our details, down here we have our materials, and here's the body. And in our body, this is a customizable material. We actually have this masked color. So I can change the color of this car through this material node and network. So if instead of I wanted it to be blue or green or cyan or yellow, whatever color I want it to be, let's make it blue just for different sake today. That's all I have to do. After you've edited that change, just to save and close, you'll notice that the front bumper is still red, so we need to change it too. I'm not sure which one that is on. I'm going to guess probably not the glass, probably the pieces. There we go. There's the pieces, and we could just adjust that to also blue, or I could adjust it to black if I wanted like a black trim on it. It's kind of up to you on that, whatever you all want for that. But there's just one way to customize your scenes from each other, and all cars should have this. Here's the sedan. We can go to the body material and adjust it. Let's make it red. We're kind of just flipping these across. Just make sure to hit save before you close out of the material. And now my sedan is a different color because red goes faster. I would just be cautious about using these, and if you do change the color, make sure you're doing so with intent. For example, like in this, like I'm just going to set this to like a dark gray. A little bit of a blue tinge is okay, but it's mostly going to be black, just because that way it looks a little bit more like a government vehicle or a bad guy car, right? Where they have everything super, super dark. We could also adjust the glass a little bit more if we wanted to. We could pull that up and adjust the opacities to be very darker, I should say, than they currently were. Or we could just change up these settings a lot. I'm just going to make that one a little bit darker. Again, just trying to make it as mysterious and ominous as possible. That way, it's like, oh, I got to dodge it and I can get it away from this car because I don't know what their intentions of life are. Moving on, that's not enough in my eyes, right? Like, that actually, livens up this scene a good amount, if you ask me, because now this definitely feels like a shadow government vehicle coming to chase this red Fast and Furious Dominic Toretto down, right? But does it, this scene still is very harsh in the lighting and the shading and everything, and it doesn't look great. And what we can do is we can start going in and playing around with our render, updating our lighting. And there's a lot of things that we can do to do that. We'll talk simply first about lighting adjustments. With your cursor selected in the viewport, and then you click that window, you can hold Control plus L to rotate your lighting around. And this just adjusts, which direction it's coming from, like what time of day is it? Is it high noon? Is it late evening? I would really recommend avoiding putting the sun directly behind. And what I was thinking of when I set up the scene is to just have the shadow kind of come across the road, so somewhere over there. Additionally, you should be able to go up to your lighting, and then your light source, and adjust the intensity of it as well. Because mine was pretty dang bright, so I'm going to adjust that down. It was like 7.5. I put it down to 4.8. Feeling a little bit better now with my choices on that. Looks a little bit nicer. Cool. So my scene, aside from the floating animation and the oddities of that, It's looking pretty nice. I'm kind of curious if, yeah, that car, I think, was just not zeroed out when I imported it. So it's just a little offset, but that's okay. So aside from all of that, what else we could do is enable what's called a post-processing volume. And these are really, really, really excellent to add into our scenes. You can just do that by going up here to this plus icon, going down to volumes and finding post-process. There it is, post-process volume. We always just search post-process volume. There you go. I've already added mine, and let me just toggle it on so you can kind of see the differences between having it off and having it on. And this is how we get to be really creative with this assignment. I think some things are working a little bit better than others. But I think overall, this just makes my assignment look a little bit more creative rather than anything else. And we can adjust these settings down. And I really want to encourage you all to look beyond what I'm showing you with this post-process volume and look into how to use it properly, and how to change certain settings up. Additionally, this fog is looking a little odd in this shot. Yeah, it's the experimental fog. Or exponential, not experimental, exponential fog height. I turned that one off for this shot. But I think I might leave it off entirely. What's it look like here? And I think that's part of this process, right? It actually kind of looks nice here. It gives us a nice little haze. But here, there's a very clear, very, very, very clear fall off that looks bad. So rather than trying to fix it there, I'm just going to turn it off for that scene. Might render that one separately and then do it here as well. Cool. So now I can start thinking about what all does this post-process volume do. First off, I'm adding bloom in. So you can see here, I have it selected on the right side in my details. I now have this long list of options of things that I've added to it. I'll just kind of go through them one by one. So I've added bloom with a decently high intensity and this scattered dispersion option. Make sure that you use convolution with bloom. It just gives you a better result. And again, we're not optimizing for gameplay, we're optimizing for cinematography. So it doesn't really matter if we lose a couple of frames per second on the playback, as long as our render isn't taking us 20 minutes per frame, we're fine. The intensity is how much of the bloom it's going to be. Is that going to scatter a lot, or is it going to scatter very little? It's kind of up to you stylistically how you choose to do that. I'm going to actually reduce mine. I think it was pretty drastic. And you can see there, the bloom is the scatter of light. It is not, where are we at? It is not these lens flares, which is another option down here at the bottom, where we can crank the intensity up and we can really Michael Bay it. No, not Michael Bay. What's the dude's name? Did Star Trek and all that. I can't remember his name now. Regardless, you can really crank it up and make it look pretty rough, or you can just tone it down to a subtle level, and that actually adds a decent amount for you as well. It's here in this shot too, but I don't think it needs to be. And what you can do is we can animate this. So for up to frames 30, I'm going to take my bokeh size, I'm going to keyframe it, but then at frame 31, I'll keyframe it again so it comes back on. But I'll go back to frame 30 and actually reduce that to 0. So, I didn't set a keyframe. Set keyframe. There we go. So for shot 0, there is no lens flare. And then what I actually animated here with this lens flare is that it starts at frame 31 pretty low, and then it progresses and gets higher as we get close to that car. I animated the threshold, not the bokeh size, but that's fine. Bunk. In fact, I'll just animate the threshold even lower at the first shot. So the higher the threshold, the more light it needs before it actually starts rendering, and the lower the threshold, you can see that those values updating and animating in the lower right corner of the screen. There we go. Nice. So these are pretty customizable. So that's lens flare. You can play around with those settings. Let's see what else we got. We got chromatic aberration. If you're not familiar with what that is, just direct your eyes to the, here I can zoom in a little bit and you can see the edge of the screen as we get that chromatic aberration, as the RGB colors start to separate out. Really popular format from VHS. Kind of an imperfection that we can add in to help distract from things. I wouldn't recommend going too hard into this, but if you want to play around with it, you can. You could increase the intensity to be very, very high, or you can increase it to be, or decrease it to be very subtle, which is subtle always goes a long way in my eyes. Additionally, this offset just means, hey, is it going to be all the way to the center of the screen, or is it just going to be on the edges of the screen? Exposure is another great thing to deal with. I have it enabled, but I don't actually have it. I just have it set to 0, so I'm not actually adjusting anything. I do have my minimum and maximum brightness set here at the bottom. Those are just the default values though. But I can increase the exposure, or I can decrease the exposure. I would be cautious with this one if I were you all. I wouldn't mess with this one too much. But it is just nice to know that it is there. Let's see, exposure. We talked about bloom. Depth of field we've already enabled, and we have those settings coming from Maya as well. And we talked about those, animating those on the sequence level. Image effects. Oh, we can enable a vignette if we want. If you don't know what a vignette is, it is just how dark around the corners of your screen the image is. I don't really recommend that. Cool. So that's, in a nutshell, the lens options. But gradient options, I think, are where it really takes off. And we can enable these temperature gradients to help our objects look a little bit, or our camera shots look a little bit cooler or warmer, right? So we can either go full-blown Breaking Bad Mexico shots, or we can go very cool, I don't know, like Grey's Anatomy Seattle shots. And just being able to adjust the color temperature is great. It's a great color grading thing to do. We could also adjust the saturation, which you can tell I've pumped up a little bit. So I've checked it on there. In these menus, it's very easy to deal with. It is a slider left-right. Saturation is easy to overblow and make your stuff look crazy. So I'm going to pull that back a bit. Contrast is always great to, take a look at that, right? Like just how much I've improved my shot from these gray tones to just adding a little bit of contrast in adds so much. Cool. What else? Shadows, I've also just saturated and contrasted the actual shadows in the scene. Very subtle, but you can see here in the far left of the screen just how much of that brick it brings out where the shadow is. So I just recommend playing around with these settings. And again, go beyond. I'm just giving you a brief overview of what I've done. Go beyond what I've done, right? And just take it to that next level. I've also enabled the reflections and improved those. And that does actually improve the quality of our reflections here, but it's not perfect by any means, right? I've tried these other settings. Ooh, none reflections for some reason gives us these crazy. I don't know what's happening. But I'm gonna leave it to Lumen and that quality to 4. It is hard to get this to be a perfect reflection, is what I'm trying to say, without going too much deeper into the material itself. Ambient occlusion is another great thing to add or subtract from your scenes. So just, again, look into the post-processing volume, look into what it can do. Don't overdo it in your scenes. I think I've kind of overdone it here a little bit with saturation and contrast. That being said, this can add a lot to your projects. Additionally, real quick, if you do have a car from the interior, I kind of cheated in the sense of I turned my glass all the way the opacity up, because if the opacity is down, we can't see out of the car. You can't see all these effects that we're doing. So I've just turned that up a ton so we can barely see it, if at all. And it just helps that shot a lot. And I can adjust that for leather shots too. All right. What else do I have on my list? Lighting adjustment. We're talking about render settings. All right. Let's talk about the render settings, because we did talk about doing this in the movie. Render queue. And I have a car chase preset here. And just to talk about them, I've got the EXR. I have this deferred rendering, which I think you just get by default. If not, there's my settings for that. Anti-aliasing, I've put that up just to 16 just to help us out a little bit. You can improve the quality here by pumping those numbers up if you want. And then here are my variables. Let me zoom in so you can see those. And this is what I recommend for optimization of this scene. It takes me, I think it took me like 3 minutes to render this scene with these settings. And if they ever require you, or makes you take longer, you can always reduce the screen percentage down. I currently have it set to 200. You could do it at 150, 125, or get rid of it entirely. What this does is it allows the able to render essentially our leaves in our scene at a higher percentage, and then essentially squash them back down to the proper resolution that we're looking for. I am trying to force our LODs for all of our foliage as well to 0. LODs are levels of detail. When things are further away from us in video games, they are a different model, and when we get closer, they're a more detailed model. And we don't want that in our scene. We just want always the high quality. So by forcing this to the lowest level, that means it's the highest quality. I know, it's weird, but you gotta think about it, right? Like, if your character only had 3 levels and then your buildings had 10 levels, right? You can't say, okay, I need my maximum LOD to be 10 when my character only has 3. That's why 0 is the highest number. Then that's it for the console variables. I have enabled a new one, high resolution. I don't think I talked about this previously as well. Just adding that under the settings to high resolution. And then my output, I do have this currently at 1920 by 1080. And we am going to change this to update, use custom frame rate to 30 FPS. And make sure to set my output resolution to what I would like it. 3840 by 2160, 3840 by 2160. So that's 4K. Again, you can go down to 2K, you can go down to 1K. I've put those in the document as well, so y'all can see that. And that's it. I'm ready to start rendering. This is the previous version that I had. I can just select that and delete that. This is Car Chase Final, that sequence with both of the shots that I have in there ready to go. I can say render local and start rendering this out. It's going to keep my post-processing volume. In fact, I'll just go ahead and click it. That way you can kind of see this process. We're going to get